How's it going, everyone? I'm Dylan. This is All You Can Board. Welcome back to another Marvel Champions video. There are going to be a lot in the next few days, or I guess 3 total, and then you'll see another one from me in about a week's time to review the entirety of this expansion. But we got 3 new hero packs. I think it was supposed to be 4, but here in Canada, Phoenix got delayed, so we're not going to see Phoenix until I think later in October, which even though I'm sad not to get Phoenix now, it also gave me a little bit of a reprieve because there's a lot to cover this weekend, a lot to play test, and a lot of heroes to discover and to review. So today, of course, this video you're watching is going to be Colossus. Keep an eye out on the channel for the next coming days. You're also going to see Shadowcat and Cyclops, but I'll give you a little spoiler alert here. I'm pretty sure Colossus is my favorite of those 3 heroes so far. It's close between a couple, but Colossus has been a lot of fun to play, and that's why I thought I would kick things off with Colossus. I'm here in my cardigan because it's fall weather, my favorite time of the year. I haven't shaved all weekend because I've just been playtesting Marvel Champions and doing other work, so let's just jump into it. This is going to be great. We're going to kick things off with the alter ego, which is Piotr Rasputin. I still don't know how to properly pronounce this name, so I'm just going to butcher it like I do most things. Recovery of 4. Setup here is search your deck for a copy of Organic Steel and add it to your hand. Aspiring Artist is the ability. Response: after you change to this form, shuffle a Colossus card from your discard pile into your deck. The Organic Steel starting in your hand, it was a huge deal for me. I remember previewing this card and thinking it was really cool, but knowing that there's 2 copies of Organic Steel in the deck, and you're always going to start the game with 1 in your hand, I don't think out of any of the games I played, I didn't play it on my first turn. There may be a hand you get where just like you can't justify because there are things that started in your hand. You have this amazing hand. But Organic Steel is just so good, and we'll get to it in a bit, but it's essentially a way to refresh tough status cards on your character to get, every time 1 gets removed, you get another one. And it's a temporary thing, but to start the game with that in play just sets you up for such an advantage, puts you ahead of the curve, especially depending on the other cards you draw into this turn and the next couple turns. Being able to have those tough status cards to use as a resource and to protect yourself potentially, it goes a long way. So awesome setup ability. I really, really appreciate that. The Aspiring Artist ability, also really good. It's a little bit situational. I think it's always better when your deck is low because you have a bunch of cards in your discard pile, so you are likely going to have really, really solid targets. And if you shuffle them into your deck, you're going to get them back really quickly. Early on in the game, it could be useful to shuffle something into your deck, but you might not see it for a while. You might not, reap the full benefits of it. But later in the game, for sure, especially if you only have, like 10 or less cards in your deck, you're able to grab pretty much anything you want from your discard pile, shuffle it in. You might just see it the very next turn. So you're kind of setting your next turn up, which is really, really neat. Overall, great alter ego. I should mention hand size of 6, hit points of 14, really high for Colossus. Good all around. Going into the hero form, we have 1 thwart, 2 attack, 2 defense, a pretty good stat line, a little bit low in the thwart, but you have some ways to boost that. Colossus can have 1 additional tough status card, huge deal. As we get into some of these other cards and you start to see, how you're using tough status cards as a resource specifically, and use them besides just as a way to negate damage, you'll start to realize how beneficial it is to have extra on Colossus at your disposal when you need them. Steel Skin, response: after you change to this form, give Colossus a tough status card. That was also very important. At first time I read it, and you think like, oh, that's great because Colossus uses tough status cards, just having this guaranteed way to get one, great. But it is very, very important. Always having that guaranteed way to have a tough status card makes it so that you rarely have a situation where you're flipping from alter ego that turn and you're not going to be able to fully, take advantage of Colossus. A lot of things that he does are boosted by the ability of having a tough status card that you can cash in as a resource, or if you get rid of one, you get to draw extra cards, whatever the case may be. Having a guaranteed one just always allows you to basically get more mileage out of your turn. You're almost always going to have something that takes advantage of it. And in the worst case, you just have a way to protect yourself to stay in hero form a little bit longer. So really, really solid ability. Hand size is low with 4. Colossus all around is very powerful. I think if Colossus had a hand size of 5, this would be a little bit too overpowered of a hero. Having that hand size of 4 makes it so that even though you have all these ways to stay in hero form for so long, eventually you may want to have that bigger hand and you'll go to alter ego or to heal, obviously. But with tough status cards, that was less of an issue for me, to be honest. It was more just being able to go there to know I'm going to get a guaranteed tough status card coming back. Yes, if I want to heal some, great, but also I can replenish my hand, get a larger hand size. Although you'll see that there are actually ways to make up for the fact that you have a lower hand size, and when you get to that point, you have your kit built up. Colossus is very powerful. Okay, Shadowcat. This is the first Colossus card and is the signature ally. 3 cost, 3 health, 2 thwart, 2 attack. Shadowcat ignores the guard and patrol keywords and any crisis icons in play. Nothing overly fancy here. This is basically taking the Shadowcat hero and basically turning it into ally form, which is normally what we see. They kind of try to, take the thematics that they've created with a hero when they make an ally and incorporate that in some way. This one, it's good, but it's very situational. You have to have a scenario that you're dealing with where ignoring guard and patrol keywords and crisis icons is something that you need to be doing. Otherwise, this is strictly just a 3 cost, 3 health ally with 2 stats, which isn't bad. It's just, if that's all you're going to get out of Shadowcat, it's never going to quite feel like it's reaching its potential, obviously, especially because at that point, if you were just going with plain, empty text box allies, 2 costs are always going to be better because it's just a cheaper way to get a chump blocker out. So Shadowcat is situational, but in those situations, it's honestly better than I thought it was going to be. Obviously it is good to ignore guard and patrol keywords, but I guess it had been a while since I really took on scenarios that was such a huge deal and a bit of a game changer. And there are like scenarios in Mutant Genesis that, as I've been playtesting, where being able to ignore those keywords and those icons and just sort of do what you want with the board, it made all the difference, because they do set things up with different side schemes and stuff in play that are really stopping you from targeting that main scheme, for instance. Or there are these guard minions that just come out at the wrong time and you're like, oh my god, like, do I really have to deal with this guard minion? Having this option is really, really good. So again, situational, maybe not as powerful by any means as other signature allies we've seen, but still useful when you find the right situation. Then we have Peter's Studio, a 1-cost support, alter ego action, exhaust Peter's Studio, discard cards from your deck until you discard a Colossus card, add that card to your hand. This has the potential to be really good, and for the couple games that I got it out, having access to just always getting a Colossus card into your hand is really useful, especially because Colossus cards are pretty powerful. There was one situation where I discarded a large portion of my deck to get to that first Colossus card, and I don't even think the one I got was necessarily something that I was hoping to target that turn. But either way, more often than not, you're not going to discard too many cards off the top of your deck, and I think depending how much of your deck is in your discard pile, you can kind of take a peek in there and also know how many cards roughly. You don't have to do a straight count, just like being able to look and say, okay, I know I haven't seen a bunch of Colossus cards, I shouldn't have to discard too many. That knowledge will help you out with using this card. But getting that free card draw of a specific Colossus card, discarding some cards is usually worth it because Colossus cards are so powerful. Iron Will, this is a 2-cost upgrade, part of his kit. It's a superpower. Colossus gets +1 thwart. That is really good just to bring the base 1 thwart up to 2, so he has 2s across the board. But even better is the hero response. After a tough status card is discarded, draw 1 card. This card contributes in a large way to not having to go to alter ego form, even when you're wanting a larger hand size, because you will often find ways to discard tough status cards. That's basically the entire crux of the character, and every time you do, you're drawing a card. So if you start a turn with 2 tough status cards and everything you're doing that turn is going to use them both as resources, you're essentially getting back to that hand size of 6, and then potentially with the cards that you've picked up and the cards you have in your hand, maybe you're able to replenish some of those tough status cards. Maybe you have Organic Steel that replenishes them, and you're not even in any worse state than you were in, but you ended up kind of having that 6-card hand size as well. So this is a really, really powerful card. It's one of those cards that if you have it in your opening hand, if you have it in your opening 2 hands, you just want to play it. You don't want, that is, you count yourself lucky, you play it, you benefit from the extra thwart all game, and you benefit from this immense card draw that's going to kind of draw it over the course of the game, and it'll make it so you don't have to go to alter ego quite as often. Titanium Muscles. This is a 2-cost upgrade. Colossus gets +1 attack, which now puts his attack to 3. With both these together, he has a solid stat line. Hero resource, exhaust this card to generate a strength resource for each tough status card on Colossus. This is good. It's honestly, like, more often than not, you're always going to hit 1 on this. There are going to be times where you just don't have a tough status card and you think, oh darn, like I could really use that resource and I'm just not in the right situation for it. But more often than not, you're always going to hit that 1 resource in addition to getting this +1 attack. But the times times that you hit the 2 resources, because you have 2 tough status cards on Colossus, it's going to feel great. Then you start to feel overpowered. Then it starts to feel like you're able to do way more in your turn, especially again with your 4-card hand size. A lot of the stuff we're seeing in this kit is a way to negate this 4-card hand size, so that when you really build Colossus up, you don't even feel the effects of a low hand size, and you don't even have to go to alter ego form all that often because of all these tough status cards. So you end up getting into this phase where you're just always on the offensive if you want to be, and it's sort of a last resort to go to alter ego form. It feels really good, and I think that's one of the reasons I really enjoy playing Colossus. All right, 2 copies of Organic Steel. We've talked about this a couple times. Organic Steel is a 2-cost upgrade that has 2 uses. Hero response after a tough status card is discarded from Colossus, exhaust this card and remove 1 steel counter to give Colossus a tough status card. You're negating the loss of a tough status card in a way. Like the loss is still happening because it'll trigger abilities and stuff like that, but you're just getting it back. So you get to do that twice, which means that, you know, a card that like the ones we've looked at where you can use tough status cards as resources, like Titanium Muscles, you can use that. Then you can use another card that says cash in your tough status card to boost your damage by 6, or to add stun and confuse to an attack that you're doing. You can do that, not lose the tough status card, use another card, or just leave yourself set up going into the villain phase where you did a whole bunch of stuff that you know you should be vulnerable, but now you're not. Organic Steel is just really, really good. And the fact that there's 2 of them, you're going to see it more than just in that first setup phase of the game at the beginning, but you're going to always start the game way more set up than a lot of heroes are by having this guaranteed upgrade in play. And you're going to gain another one later on before you even shuffle your deck. So honestly, it's just a solid card. I don't, like I said, I don't think I went a single game without playing it on my first turn, because you have it there. It's not that expensive. It doesn't prohibit you from doing other things in your turn, and it's just so good. It's hard not to pass up. I love Organic Steel. All right, Made of Rage. This might be my favorite card, and if you know me and the type of cards I gravitate towards and enjoy in Marvel Champions, maybe this isn't a surprise. This is a 0-cost event that says when you make a basic attack, discard a tough status card from your hero, you get +6 attack for that attack, and it gains Overkill. This is so powerful, and I know there's a stipulation attached to it where if you just happen to have a turn where you have this in your hand and you have no tough status cards, this is essentially a dead card. You can't do anything in your hand. But those situations for me never came up. Like, I can't think of any part in the game where I had this in my hand and I said, oh, I can't do anything with it. I always seem to have a way to get a tough status card, or I already had one. And for 0 to do 6 damage essentially is what this works out to. Yes, you have to do a basic attack, but it's basically adding on that 6 damage for 0. If you have your kit with like your Titanium Muscles in play, and you're already doing base 3 damage, the fact that you're now doing base 9 damage on an attack swing just because you have Made of Rage in your hand is bonkers. It's such a good card. You have Overkill on there too. You can go right through a minion to the villain. It's just great. It feels great. I had a game where I had 2 of them in my hand, and I was able to utilize them both. That felt amazing. It's just a great card. It's a fun one. It's a flashy one. It's the kind of cards I love in Marvel Champions. We've got 3 copies of Steel Fist. This is another really good attack card. 2-cost event for dealing 5 damage to an enemy. So great, cost to damage ratio. But on top of that, if you discard a tough status card from your hero, stun and confuse the enemy, which completely locks that enemy out of the next turn. Going like the amount of times I used this, and essentially had I was playing 2-handed solo, had one of my heroes, Shadowcat, for instance, in alter ego form, and had Colossus in hero form, and negated both activations of the villain with that confuse and stun card. I mean, that happened more than once, and you can kind of time that with Steel Fist, having that in mind where you're going to leave your heroes. It's just a really solid card. It's already fine with the stat line for 2, but removing a tough status card as a resource to get a stun and confuse is not that steep of a cost, especially when you have things like Organic Steel that might just replace it, or you have ways to have that just trigger a card draw for you. Like it's usually never that huge of a deal to get rid of a tough status card unless you really have nothing else going on. It's the last one on your hero. Then maybe you have to wait a little bit more, but otherwise Steel Fist is just a really, really good card. Then we've got 2 copies of Bulletproof Protector, 0-cost event, discard a tough status card from your hero to either give your hero 2 tough status cards or to ready your hero. In all the games I played, and I'm not saying that this is bad, it's just the way it worked out for me, I never used ready your hero. And that is a completely viable choice, especially for 0. There's nothing wrong with that choice. But for me, using this to essentially just for 0 gain a tough status card was always more worth it. And that's basically what it is. You have to have a single tough status card to be able to even use it, because you need to discard one to gain 2. But as long as you have one, you're essentially just tossing this card and exchanging it for a tough status card. With Colossus, with how much use you get out of tough status cards, that's just too good to pass up. Not to mention that because you discard one to gain 2, that discarding of one triggers the drawing of a card for your kit, the one that gives you +1 thwart that now I'm forgetting the name of. Essentially gives you a card draw as well. So you can look at this when you have that out as discard a tough status card, gain 2 tough status cards, and draw a card for a single card for 0, which is bonkers. It's just really, really good, and it always made more sense to me than readying your hero. But having that as an option, if you really need to get extra swing in, or like whether that be for thwarting or attacking, is just really, really good, or setting yourself up to defend, or whatever the case may be. Lastly, we have 2 copies of Armor Up. This is a 0 cost event, another 0 cost. When the villain, Alter Ego Interrupt, when the villain activates, change to hero form. This is it's a really, really interesting card. It's situational in that you want to get that free flip back to hero form, which often is really, really good. But for me, the problem I had is there are so many other good cards in Colossus's deck and so many other things that I was trying to do that I almost always had Armor Up in my hand and had to use it as a resource to fund something else I was doing. I was rarely in a situation where I could say, I'm going to leave this in my hand, flip to Alter Ego, get like a free heal, or you'd be able to use the action ability there, and then know I'm going to get the free flip back for when the villain activates. In theory, that's great. And I'm sure there are situations where it is great, but for me, I just always had to use this to pay for other things. There are always so many other things I wanted to do with Colossus, so it's by no means a bad card. I just think it gets outshined a little bit by some of the other stuff that's going on. But again, that depends on your play style. That's also the way I was playing Colossus. You can play a little bit more protectively, where you're going into Alter Ego more often with Armor Ups ready in your hand to get the free flip back, get that free tough status card going back. There are definitely ways and reasons to use it. For me, it just fell just ever so slightly short. Okay, getting into the protection cards. First one we've got is a Nightcrawler. This is a new ally. 3 cost ally, 2 health, interrupt, or 2 thwart, 2 attack. Interrupt, when an X-Men character would take any amount of damage from an enemy attack, spend an energy resource and return Nightcrawler to your hand, prevent all that damage. This is a really, really interesting card, and I don't feel I ever got to fully utilize it in any of the games I played. I got Nightcrawler out, but not in a way that felt like I was really taking full advantage of what Nightcrawler can do. I feel like this is one of those cards that you deck build around at least a little bit, and you kind of plan for using Nightcrawler to its full potential. But the fact that you can play Nightcrawler, it only has 2 health, but you can get either, whether it be a thwart or an attack activation out of Nightcrawler, have this as an option to block if you need to, but then also just know you can get Nightcrawler back to your hand and get a free another use of it. Essentially, there's obviously a way to go infinite with Nightcrawler. Whether that's obviously not worth it to constantly paying 3 resources just to get a single activation of Nightcrawler and bring it back to your hand. But there's so many combos out there that I know that there's probably a way better way to utilize Nightcrawler. And it's just a really cool card in practice. Powering up Nightcrawler can, in a certain, with some of those training cards and things like that, can utilize, maybe allow you to utilize them more before he comes back to your hand. Regardless, it's a cool card. I didn't get to use it as much as I would have liked, but I'm hoping that as we move forward and see more decks come out and more heroes get released, that we see Nightcrawler used to its full potential. Then we've got Polaris, 3 cost ally as well, 3 health, 1 thwart, 2 attack. Response after Polaris enters play, give an X-Men character a tough status card. So obviously this is really good in Colossus. Most of my plays was just less because I wanted an ally in play and more because it was like, hey, I could use a tough status card and I'll also get a blocker who can also do 2 attack this turn. It just made sense. I got the full value out of the resources. You can almost look at it as out of the 3 resources I spent 1 to do 2 damage, I spent 1 to gain a tough status card, and then I spent 1 to soak up a hit and essentially prevent all damage. That's really cost efficient. You're getting a lot of use there, but it's extra good in Colossus where that tough status card is really more than a tough status card. It goes so much further than it would with other characters. So I feel like this is always going to shine more in a deck like our hero like Colossus. I think it'll still be good in other decks, but I think it's going to be one that you just, if you're playing Colossus Protection, it goes to the front of the line of allies you're considering including. All right, Protective Training, 3 copies, 1 cost upgrade, attached to an X-Men ally, max 1 training upgrade per ally, attached ally gets plus 3 hit points. Not a lot to say here, it's a pretty straightforward card. Plus 3 hit points is a huge boost, and it can make it can really be an entire, hit you've soaked in, or multiple activations of attacks or thwarts. There's a lot that can do. It's a big deal, especially only for 1 cost. I feel like in protection especially, it's really, really good. I didn't get to like fully... I used it a couple times in the campaign, but it never in a way that I thought like, oh my god, this card is blowing me away. Like, this is something I would like. It's going to be an automatic include in protection builds with certain allies. But it's good enough that I would consider it in almost every deck I'm building. If there's going to be allies that I want to extend the longevity, if they're not just there to simply hit play, take a block, go. Like, and even then, if you can always guarantee or 90% of the time guarantee that this is going to be the difference between a hero getting 1 block in and 2, that can be a huge deal in protection builds. So it's just a solid card for 1 cost to give you those 3 hit points on an ally. Lots of room there, and it's just a really, really cool card. All right, we've got Powerful Punch, 2 cost event, hero interrupt, attack defense. When an enemy initiates an attack, deal 4 damage to that enemy. This is pretty good. It was less good in my experience with Shadowcat and Colossus and Cyclops going through this campaign, because I never felt like I was in a situation where I needed that extra damage like I would if I was playing a protection character solo. And what I mean by that is if you're playing a protection character solo and you haven't built the deck, with a lot of options to do damage, a lot of what you're doing is protecting yourself, negating damage, but you still have to find ways to chip off the health of the villain and ultimately to win the scenario. Having this powerful punch, it be a way that every single time the villain activates against you, you're essentially getting 4 free damage. Not free, you're paying 2 resources, but 4 damage for not having to just the villain doing something he would have done anyways, is just a way to sort of chip away at that health. And for 2 costs to do 4 damage at that point in protection, worth it. With Colossus having so many other ways where even just with like Steel Fist, you have 3 copies that are 2 cost deal 5 damage with another upside, it just always felt like I had this in a hand where, yeah, I could keep it and spend the resources and do this, but then if I did, I would have way less options of what I could do on my turn because I'd have less cards. He already has only a 4 cost hand. It just never made financial sense to spend those resources to do 4 damage when I can spend them to do a lot more damage or do other things that are more efficient. I think it's a really cool card. I think it's really beneficial in solo protection builds. Maybe not Colossus specifically all the time, but it definitely has a place. It just, in this setup I was currently going with, it just didn't make as much sense. And then we've got 3 copies of Mutant Protectors. This is a 1-cost event. Play only if your identity has the X-Men trait. Hero interrupt. When an enemy attacks, put an X-Men ally into play from your hand, exhaust it, and declare it the defender for this attack. So you're essentially going to rush an ally from your hand into play to block an attack. If that ally survives, it's way better, obviously, but even if it doesn't, you're essentially spending 1 to negate an attack. You're losing a card from your hands. You're essentially paying 2 resources at that point. It could have been a valuable ally. It's situational, and I say that about a lot of cards, but in general, you have to have the right ally target for this to have it take full advantage. There are plenty of ally targets that if you hit with Mutant Protectors would be awful. It would feel like I just wasted that ally, or I wasted these cards that I could have used as resources to pay for something else. So you really have to have built a deck where you are taking full advantage of a card like this, and you're going to have multiple targets to hit with it, so you don't feel like you have to get this exact combination in your hand for it to be useful. But it's a really cool card. I like the idea of rushing out an ally to block and then potentially having it survive. Really cool, and I'm more curious to see what people do with building decks around it and what they come up with for it. Lastly, we've got 2 copies of Defensive Energy. So this is a resource card, max 2 per deck. Hero interrupt. When you spend this card to play a defense event, draw 1 card. Pretty straightforward. If you're playing protection, you're likely playing defense events already. It does produce a wild resource, so you have tons of flexibility there. And just for using it as a resource, you're getting an extra card draw. In Colossus, where you often have a lower hand size, that's really great, but you have to also offset the fact that this is taking up a card slot in your hand. So yes, this is a resource that if you use it for a defense event, you're drawing a card. If you're not hitting that, you're essentially just getting not a dead card in your hand, but you're just getting a card that can only be used as a resource and nothing else. You don't have the option of saying, do I want to play this, do I want to spend it? So you really have to have had enough defense events and not get unlucky where you draw it in a situation where you can't utilize it, because you want that extra card draw. You want to refresh it. You want to essentially have gotten this free resource because you pulled into another card. Really cool card. I use it a bunch, and I was able to hit it more often than not, and then it feels really, really good when you do. And just keep that in mind as you're deck building, that you are going to encounter situations where it's just going to feel not as great. That just kind of comes with the territory of playing cards that have this kind of specific trigger. Okay, we have Professor X. This is our first basic card, Basic Ally, an exciting one. 3-cost ally, 3 health, 3 thwart, 0 attack though. Force response after Professor X enters play. Choose one. Confuse the villain, stun a minion, or ready an X-Men character. At the end of the round, if Professor X is still in play, discard him. So this is sort of the Nick Fury effect, but for X-Men, where he's only going to last this single round. So you're not, playing Professor X to stay out there and get a bunch of activations and block. You're getting the one use out of Professor X. Essentially, what you're obviously doing is you're going to use that 3 thwarts. So you're for a cost of 3, you're going to thwart for 3, and you're on top of that either going to confuse the villain, stun a minion, or ready an X-Men character. Ready an X-Men character, I think. Well, I was going to say ready an X-Men character is probably the best target you're going to get out of those 3, but it really depends. Like if an option was stun the villain, I feel like that would end up being the one you gravitate towards the most, because negating a villain attack is usually going to be a huge deal. But negating, a scheme of a villain can be just as beneficial. So it really depends on the situation if you're going to use that. I never use the stun a minion. I feel like you're stunning a minion if you're planning to leave it out there a little bit longer and you're not going to kill it right away. And for me, I was just taking care of minions too quick that I never made sense to stun one. Whereas ready an X-Men character is so versatile, being able to do that for one of your heroes and be able to get another activations, which could be 3 damage or 3 thwart on top of the 3 you're already doing here. It could be allowing you to use an ability. It could get an ally extra mileage. Like, there's just so much flexibility there. That's the one I was choosing more often than not. And then you're hoping that you're going to also block with Professor X, because then you get the full mileage out of Professor X, and you don't have to worry about him being discarded because he served his purpose and died, I guess. I guess Professor X does die in a lot of X-Men movies, so thematically this makes sense, right? All right, then we've got the X-Jet. I guess that was a spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen X-Men movies from like the early 2000s. 3-cost support, resource, exhaust the X-Jet, generate a wild resource for a player whose identity has the X-Men trait. So this is just a basic card that allows you to generate wild resources. It's only going to be if you have the X-Men traits, but you're only including this obviously if you have the X-Men trait, and at that point it's just a way to get a free extra wild resource for any player who has that trait. Cool card, nothing super exciting. We've seen this with like basic cards that were around for the Avengers cycle. We're now getting them for the X-Men cycle. Really cool. Then we've got, lastly, Shadow and Steel. This is the team-up card with Colossus and Shadowcat. 2-cost event, max 1 per deck. Hero Interrupt, when an enemy attacks, prevent all damage from that attack and deal 4 damage to the attacking enemy. This is just a solid card. Being able to, like I was obviously able to use this a bunch because I'm going through the campaign with these two. Being able to, for 2 costs, essentially negate the entire attack and do 4 damage back. It's basically the card that we looked at before, the Powerful Punch, but you're also negating the attack. Like, it's the exact same cost, it's the exact same damage, but you're preventing all that damage as well, which is just a way better version of that card. But obviously the stipulation being you have to be able to do the team up. But if you're playing with those 2 heroes already, this is just always going to be good every time you draw it. You're always going to leave yourself in a better situation. It's rarely going to be that you don't want to use that card. Awesome team up. Next up, we've got the Obligation, which is Homesick. You may flip to Alter Ego form, choose Exhaust Peter Rasputin, remove Homesick from the game, or discard this card in each tough status card from your identity, and if you discarded no tough status cards this way, this card gains Surge. I don't know why you'd ever choose the second one. I gotta be honest with you, I never did. It is much worse. It doesn't allow you to remove Homesick from the game. The first one does, and the first one only involves you exhausting your character. Yes, there could be a situation where exhausted, and I guess if you really don't want to go to Alter Ego and Colossus really wants to spend time in hero form, but it's just such a detriment to discard all your tough status cards, and if you have none, for this to surge into something else, that it just kind of makes sense to just take the hit, go into Alter Ego form, exhaust, and know that when you flip back, you're going to get a tough status card for going to hero form, and this is gone from the game. I think you just kind of always go with the first one. All right, Nemesis minion, which is Juggernaut. 1 scheme, 4 attack, 8 health, stalwart, and toughness. This is a beastly boy and has a boost ability that if this activation is an attack, that attack gains overkill and piercing. This is just a really hard to get rid of minion. There's no other extra ability. It's just starts with a tough status card, has stalwart, has 8 health, does 4 attack. It's just one of those ones that you're going to have to really, really focus on getting out of the game. It's going to take a while unless you kind of have that perfect, Colossus hand to remove this in potentially 1 hit or something. But even then, you got to remove the tough status card first. So nothing, overly flashy to talk about. It's just going to take a while to get rid of Juggernaut. It's going to be really, really annoying. We've got Rampaging Juggernaut, the side scheme. When revealed, discard each tough status card from each friendly character. Place 2 threat here for each tough status card discarded this way. This is super nasty in Colossus. Colossus is almost always going to have tough status cards, let alone if you have a way that other characters also have them. The fact that every single one is going to then cause threat to be placed on this card that you have to remove, and you've lost all the progress you've potentially made on having tough status cards built up. I mean, everything about this is bad. It's a really nasty side scheme, one of the nastier ones. I can remember seeing that specifically targets the character who it's tied to, in this case Colossus. Really nasty card. Then we've got Unstoppable, 2 copies, attached to, this is an attachment, attached to the enemy with the highest printed attack without a copy of Unstoppable already attached. Otherwise, this card gains Surge. Force Interrupt. When attached enemy attacks, the attack gains overkill and piercing. At the end of this attack, discard Unstoppable, and it gets +2 attack for being attached. This is essentially like, thematically tied to hopefully hitting Juggernaut, giving him 6 attack as well. And yes, it's going to get discarded after, but there's 2 copies. It might come up again. It's just making things even more difficult for you. If you have a way to negate getting that extra attack coming your way, or it's not going to affect you because you're blocking with an ally, maybe that's not as big of a deal, but it is just pretty nasty that you even have to deal with that. And I just realized it says it gains overkill. So even if you do block with an ally, it's coming your way anyways. It's just a nasty attachment that's going to, if it comes up unexpectedly or you're really hoping to not take extra damage, you're now going to have to figure out a way to deal with it. Lastly, we've got the Treachery Slammed. This is when revealed, you are stunned. If you are already stunned, take 2 damage. Boost, reveal this card. This is just one of those annoying treachery cards. It's not overly powerful, but getting that stun coming your way all the time, boosting into it, you have to reveal it. If you're already stunned, you don't even get off the hook. You take 2 more damage on top of already being stunned. It's just an annoying, nasty treachery card. And that's it. The other cards are reprints. I will mention that the Strength, Genius, and Energy Resource cards all have new artwork that are tied to the X-Men in this set. I know people have been for a long time kind of clamoring for different art versions of those resource cards that were often character specific. We didn't get character specific ones, but we did get X-Men specific ones, which I think is really, really cool. So that's another edition that came in all these packs. That is Colossus. Like I said, I really, really enjoy Colossus. I love the play style. He has these really huge swing turns. It's so hard for him to take damage sometimes with all these tough status cards. Having to balance using those tough status cards as a resource to make you more powerful, but also to keep them on you so that you can negate damage and not have to go to alter ego as much, finding ways to replenish those tough status cards. I love the gameplay, which is a lot of characters, but Colossus does it effectively, of trying to stay in hero form as long as you possibly can before going to alter ego, because you can get so much done when you're in hero form. Colossus is really fun to figure that puzzle out, on top of having to figure out how do I do this with only a 4-card hand size? How do I maximize the cards I am picking up? How do I get more cards in my hand by using tough status cards, whatever the case may be? It was just a really fun problem to solve. I had a lot of fun with Colossus. I'm really, really impressed with that hero in the box for sure. That is all I have to say about Colossus. Like I said, we have more Marvel Champions coming with Shadowcat, with Cyclops, and overall the review of Mutant Genesis, which you'll probably see next week. I need more time with it. But thank you so much for watching. If you're wanting to check out those heroes, take a look on the channel in the next couple days. You'll see those ones drop as well. Let me know in the comments what you think of Colossus, where he ranks with the other heroes that were released, and which ones were your favorite. Love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.